Welcome to my channel, where stories hit different and every page comes to life.
Franz Kafka wrote to his publisher in 1913 that 3 of his stories, The Judgment, The Stoker, and The Metamorphosis, belonged together. He said they shared both an obvious and a secret connection, and he wanted them published under one title, The Sons. That idea never happened during his life. Kafka was still unknown, and his publisher didn't see the point. But decades later, the stories were finally collected the way Kafka had imagined, because they reveal how deeply his writing was tied to his own life and his lifelong struggle with his father. These 3 stories were born out of a single burst of creativity in 1912, after years of failed attempts. Kafka called that moment the first time he truly felt like a writer. The Judgment, written in a single night, made him cry when he read it aloud to friends. The Metamorphosis became his most famous piece, the story of Gregor Samsa, who wakes up as an insect and quietly accepts his fate. And The Stoker became the opening of his unfinished novel America. Kafka's choice of title, The Sons, tells us everything. Every story centers on a son punished, rejected, or destroyed by a father. It's about obedience, guilt, and the impossibility of growing up under the weight of authority. In these worlds, the sons never rebel, they submit. Jorg in The Judgment jumps off a bridge because his father commands it. Gregor in The Metamorphosis dies still loving the family that abandons him. Karl in The Stoker is banished overseas, forever displaced. This pattern mirrors Kafka's own life. He saw his father, Hermann Kafka, as a dominating, humiliating force, a man who demanded obedience but broke his own rules. In his stories, Kafka turns that private war into myth. He shows how family power crushes individuality, how the father's voice becomes an inner law the son can never escape. The sons in Kafka's fiction don't change, grow, or find closure. They remain suspended, like children who never get to become adults. Their tragedy is not rebellion, but paralysis. That's what makes Kafka's writing feel so modern. It's not about heroic resistance, but quiet suffocation under love and duty. Kafka wrote these stories while secretly engaged to Felice Bauer, still living in his parents' apartment, trapped between the desire to marry and the fear of repeating his father's life. His diaries from that time are full of resentment toward his family and exhaustion from his double life, working by day, writing at night. He wanted freedom, but felt chained to obligation. He even warned Felice that marriage to him would mean living with a man childish in the worst sense. Someone consumed by writing, unable to exist in daylight. He described his ideal life as one long night, writing alone while she silently brought him food. Soon after, his body began to collapse under the same pressure his mind carried. Tuberculosis was diagnosed in 1917, but Kafka saw it as more than illness. He thought of it as the physical mark of his spiritual wound, opened the night he wrote The Judgment. During this period, he tried to turn rebellion into literature. He even considered founding an anti-patriarchal magazine with a Freudian radical named Otto Gross. In 1917, he published A Country Doctor and dedicated it to his father, a quiet act of defiance. When asked about one of the story's 11 sons, Kafka said simply, "They are 11 stories I was working on." For him, writing replaced biological fatherhood. His stories were his children. Hermann Kafka didn't understand. When his son handed him the book he'd dedicated to him, he told him to put it on the bedside table, where it stayed unread. 2 years later, Kafka wrote Letter to his father, 100 pages of calm, devastating truth. It's half confession, half lawsuit, exposing the contradictions that defined his upbringing. His father demanded obedience but broke every rule himself. He called his children weak yet crushed them whenever they tried to stand. Kafka recalled how his father raged at dinner over how food should be eaten or how bread must be cut straight, while doing the opposite himself. The result was confusion, fear, and self-doubt, a child who could neither obey nor rebel. He describes this trap perfectly. Emancipate yourself, but obey me. That's the paradox at the center of Kafka's art. Freedom that destroys itself. In the letter, he admits that even marriage felt impossible. He imagines the world as a map with his father's body stretched diagonally across it, leaving him only a few small corners to live in. And marriage, he writes, is not among them. This letter was never sent, but it stands as the final and most personal of all his son's stories. The introduction reminds us that writing for Kafka was always a form of correspondence, an endless letter to an unreachable father. In his fiction, letters appear again and again as bridges that connect and destroy at the same time. Georg's letter in The Judgment, Gregor's family's letters after his death, Karl's letter from home in The Stoker, all of them mirror Kafka's own need to speak and never be heard. In the end, life imitated art. Kafka finally escaped Prague to live in Berlin with Dora Diamond, the only woman who shared his rebellion. They planned to marry, but her Orthodox father refused. Even then, Kafka remained the son denied permission. When he died in 1924, Dora brought him back to Prague. He was buried in the family plot. Later, his parents were buried beside him. On the tombstone, his name is carved directly above his father's, the son, forever overshadowed by the man who defined and haunted his life. Closing thought. Kafka's entire body of work is one long argument between father and son. Every story, every sentence is part of that conversation. A rebellion spoken in whispers, written by a man who could never fully escape the home he longed to leave. The Judgment. For Fräulein Felice B., it was a Sunday morning at the very height of spring. Georg Benderman, a young merchant, was sitting in his own room on the second floor of one of a long row of low, graceful houses stretching along the bank of the river, distinguishable from one another only in height and colour. He had just finished a letter to an old friend who was now living abroad, had sealed it in its envelope with slow and dreamy deliberateness, and with one elbow propped on his desk, was looking out the window at the river, the bridge, and the hills on the farther bank with their tender green. He was thinking about this friend, who years before had simply run off to Russia, dissatisfied with his prospects at home. Now he was running a business in St. Petersburg, which at first had flourished but more recently seemed to be going downhill, as the friend always complained on his increasingly rare visits. So there he was, wearing himself out to no purpose in a foreign country. The exotic-looking beard he wore did not quite conceal the face Georg had known so well since childhood, and the jaundiced colour his skin had begun to take on seemed to signal the onset of some disease. By his own account, he had no real contact with the colony of his fellow countrymen there, and almost no social connection with Russian families, so that he was resigning himself to life as a confirmed bachelor. What could one write to such a man, who had obviously gone badly astray? A man one could be sorry for, but not help. Should one perhaps advise him to come home, to re-establish himself here, and take up his old friendships again? There was certainly nothing to stand in the way of that, and in general to rely on the help of his friends. But that was as good as telling him, and the more kindly it was done, the more he would take offence. That all his previous efforts had miscarried, that he should finally give up, come back home, and be gaped at by everyone as a returned prodigal, that only his friends knew what was what, and that he himself was nothing more than a big child, and should follow the example of his friends who had stayed at home and become successful. And besides, was it certain that all the pain they would necessarily inflict on him would serve any purpose? Perhaps it would not even be possible to get him to come home at all. He said himself that he was now out of touch with business conditions in his native country, and then he would still be left an alien in an alien land, embittered by his friends' advice and more than ever estranged from them. But if he did follow their advice and even then didn't fit in at home, not because of the malice of others, of course, but through sheer force of circumstances, if he couldn't get on with his friends, or without them, felt humiliated, couldn't really be said to have either friends or a country of his own any longer, wouldn't it be better for him to go on with his friends or without them, felt humiliated, couldn't really be said to have either friends or a country of his own any longer, wouldn't it be better for him to go on living abroad just as he was? Taking all this into account, how could one expect that he would make a success of life back here? For such reasons, assuming one wanted to keep up any correspondence with him at all, one could not send him the sort of real news one could frankly tell the most casual acquaintances. It had been more than 3 years since his last visit, and for this he offered the lame excuse that the political situation in Russia was too uncertain, and apparently would not permit even the briefest absence of a small businessman, though it allowed hundreds of thousands of Russians to travel the globe in perfect safety. But during these same 3 years, Georg's own position in life had changed considerably. 2 years ago his mother had died, and since then he and his father had shared the household together, and his friend had of course been informed of that, and had expressed his sympathy in a letter phrased so dryly that the grief normally caused by such an event, one had to conclude, could not be comprehended so far away from home. Since that time, however, Georg had applied himself with greater determination to his business, as well as to everything else. Perhaps it was his father's insistence on having everything his own way in the business that had prevented him, during his mother's lifetime, from pursuing any real projects of his own. Perhaps since her death, his father had become less aggressive, although he was still active in the business. Perhaps it was mostly due to an accidental run of good fortune. That was very probable indeed. But at any rate, during those 2 years, the business had prospered most unexpectedly. The staff had to be doubled, the volume was 5 times as great. No doubt about it, further progress lay just ahead. But Georg's friend had no inkling of these changes. In earlier years, perhaps for the last time in that letter of condolence, he had tried to persuade Georg to emigrate to Russia and had enlarged upon the prospects of success in St. Petersburg for precisely Georg's line of business. The figures quoted were microscopic by comparison with Georg's present operations. Yet he shrank from letting his friend know about his business success, and if he were to do so now, retrospectively, that certainly would look peculiar. So Georg confined himself to giving his friend unimportant items of gossip, such as rise at random in the memory when one is idly thinking things over on a quiet Sunday. All he desired was to leave undisturbed the image of the hometown which his friend had most likely built up and accepted during his long absence. And thus it happened that 3 times in 3 fairly widely separated letters, Georg had told his friend about the engagement of some insignificant man to an equally insignificant girl. Until, quite contrary to Georg's intentions, his friend actually began to show some interest in this notable event. Yet Georg much preferred to write about things like these, rather than to conf he himself had become engaged a month ago to a Fräulein Frieda Brandenfeld, a girl from a well-to-do family. He often spoke to his fiancée about this friend of his and the peculiar relationship that had developed between them in their correspondence. "Then he won't be coming to our wedding," she said, "and yet I have a right to get to know all your friends." "I don't want to trouble him," answered George. "Don't misunderstand, he would probably come, at least I think so, but he would feel that his hand had been forced, and he would be hurt. Perhaps he would even envy me, and certainly he'd be discontented, and without ever being able to do anything about his discontent, he'd have to go away again alone." "Alone? Do you know what that means?" "Yes. But what if he hears about our marriage from some other source?" "I can't prevent that, of course, but it's unlikely considering the way he lives. If you have friends like that, George, you shouldn't ever have gotten engaged at all." "Well, we're both to blame for that, but I wouldn't have it any other way now." And when, breathing heavily under his kisses, she was still able to add, "All the same, it does upset me. He thought it would not really do any harm if he were to send the news to his friend. That's the kind of man I am, and he'll just have to accept me or not," he said to himself. "I can't cut myself to another pattern that might make a more suitable friend for him." And in fact, he did inform his friend about his engagement in the long letter he had been writing that Sunday morning, with the following words: "I have saved up my best news for last. I am now engaged to a Fräulein Frieda Brandenfeld, a girl from a well-to-do family that settled here a long time after you went away, so that it's very unlikely you'll know her. There will be ample opportunity to tell you more about my fiancée later, but for today let me just say that I am quite happy, and as far as our relationship is concerned, the only change will be that instead of a quite ordinary friend, you will now have in me a happy friend. Besides that, you will acquire in my fiancée, who sends you her warm regards and who will soon be writing you herself, a genuine friend of the opposite sex, which is not without importance to a bachelor. I know that there are many reasons why you can't come to pay us a visit, but wouldn't my wedding be just the perfect occasion to put aside everything that might stand in the way? Still, however that may be, do just as seems good to you, without regarding any interests but your own. With this letter in his hand, Jorg had been sitting a long time at his desk, his face turned toward the window. He had barely acknowledged, with an absent smile, a greeting waved to him from the street below by a passing acquaintance. At last, he put the letter in his pocket and went out of his room, across a small hallway, into his father's room, which he had not entered for months. There was, in fact, no particular need for him to enter it, since he saw his father daily at work, and they took their midday meal together at a restaurant. In the evening, it was true, each did as he pleased, yet even then, unless Jorg, as was usually the case, went out with friends or more recently visited his fiancée, they always sat for a while, each with his newspaper, in their common sitting room. Jorg was startled at how dark his father's room was, even on this sunny morning. He had not remembered that it was so overshadowed by the high wall on the other side of the narrow courtyard. His father was sitting by the window, in a corner decorated with various mementos of Jorg's late mother, reading a newspaper which he held tilted to one side before his eyes in an attempt to compensate for some defect in his vision. On the table stood the remains of his breakfast, little of which seemed to have been consumed. "Ah, Jorg," said his father, rising at once to meet him. His heavy dressing gown swung open as he walked, and its skirts fluttered around him. "My father is still a giant of a man," Jorg said to himself. "It's unbearably dark in here," he said aloud. "Yes, it is dark," answered his father. "And you've shut the window too?" "I prefer it like that." "Well, it's quite warm outside," said Jorg, as if continuing his previous remark, and sat down. His father cleared away the breakfast dishes and set them on a chest. "I really only wanted to tell you," Jorg went on, following the old man's movements as if transfixed, "that I have just announced the news of my engagement to St. Petersburg." He drew the letter a little way from his pocket and let it drop back again. "To St. Petersburg?" asked his father. "To my friend, of course," said Jorg, trying to meet his father's eye. "In business hours he's quite different," he was thinking. "How solidly he sits here and folds his arms over his chest." "Ah, yes, to your friend," said his father emphatically. "Well, you know, father, that I didn't want to tell him about my engagement at first. Out of consideration for him, that was the only reason. You yourself know how difficult a man he is. I said to myself that someone else might tell him about my engagement, although he's such a solitary creature that was hardly likely. But I wasn't ever going to tell him myself. And now you've changed your mind, have you?" asked his father, laying his enormous newspaper on the windowsill, and on top of it his eyeglasses, which he covered with one hand. "Yes, now I've changed my mind. If he's a good friend of mine," I said to myself, "then my being happily engaged should make him happy too. And that's why I haven't put off telling him any longer. But before I mailed the letter, I wanted to let you know." "Jorg," said his father, stretching his toothless mouth wide, "listen to me. You've come to me about this business, to talk it over and get my advice. No doubt that does you honour. But it's nothing, worse than nothing, if you don't tell me the whole truth. I don't want to stir up matters that shouldn't be mentioned here. Since the death of our dear mother, certain things have happened that aren't very pretty. Maybe the time will come for mentioning them, and maybe sooner than we think. There are a number of things at the shop that escape my notice. Maybe they're not done behind my back. I'm not going to say that they're done behind my back. I'm not strong enough anymore. My memory's slipping. I haven't an eye for all those details any longer. In the first place, that's in the nature of things. And in the second place, the death of our dear little mother hit me harder than it did you. But since we're talking about it, about this letter, I beg you, George, don't deceive me. It's a trivial thing. It's hardly worth mentioning, so don't deceive me. Do you really have this friend in St. Petersburg? George rose in embarrassment. Never mind, my friends. 1,000 friends could never replace my father for me. Do you know what I think? You're not taking enough care of yourself, but old age has its own rightful demands. I can't do without you in the business, you know that very well. But if the business is going to undermine your health, I'm ready to close it down tomorrow for good. This won't do. We'll have to make a change in the way you live, a radical change. You sit here in the dark, when in the sitting room you'd have plenty of light. You just take a bite of breakfast instead of keeping up your strength properly. You sit by a closed window, and the air would be so good for you. No, Father, I'll get the doctor to come, and we'll follow his orders. We'll change rooms. You can move into the front room, and I'll move in here. You won't notice the change. All your things will be moved across the hall with you. But there's time for all that later. Go to bed now for a little. You must have some rest. Come, I'll help you take off your things. You'll see I can do it. Or if you'd rather go into the front room at once, you can lie down in my bed for the present. That would actually be the most sensible thing. Georg stood close beside his father, who had let his head with its shaggy white hair sink to his chest. "Georg," said his father in a low voice, without moving. Georg knelt down at once beside his father. In the old man's weary face, he saw the abnormally large pupils staring him fixedly from the corners of the eyes. "You have no friend in St. Petersburg. You've always been one for pulling people's legs, and you haven't hesitated even when it comes to me. How could you have a friend there of all places? I can't believe it." "Just think back a bit, Father," said George, lifting his father from the chair and slipping off his dressing gown as he stood there, now quite feebly. "Soon it'll be 3 years since my friend came to see us last. I remember you didn't like him very much. At least twice I even told you he wasn't there when he was actually sitting with me in my room. I could quite well understand your dislike of him. My friend does have his peculiarities. But then later you had a good talk with him after all. I was so proud because you listened to him and nodded and asked him questions. If you think back, you're bound to. Remember, he told us the most incredible stories of the Russian Revolution. For instance, the time he was on a business trip to Kiev and ran into a riot, and saw a priest on a balcony who cut a broad cross in blood into the palm of his hand and held the hand up and appealed to the crowd. You've told that very story yourself once or twice since. Meanwhile, Georg had succeeded in lowering his father into the chair again and carefully taking off the knitted drawers he wore over his linen undershorts and his socks. The not particularly clean appearance of his underwear made Georg reproach himself for having been so neglectful. It should certainly have been his duty to see that his father had clean changes of underwear. He had not yet explicitly discussed with his fiancée what arrangements should be made for his father in the future, for they had both silently taken it for granted that he would remain alone in the old apartment. But now, he made a quick, firm decision to take him into his own future home. It almost looked, on closer inspection, as if the care he meant to devote to his father there might come too late. He carried his father over to the bed in his arms. It gave him a dreadful feeling to observe that while he was taking the few steps toward the bed, the old man, cradled against his chest, was playing with his watch chain. For a moment he could not put him down on the bed, so firmly did he hang on to the watch chain. But as soon as he was laid in bed, all seemed well. He covered himself up and even drew the blanket higher than usual over his shoulders. He looked up at Georg with a not unfriendly expression. "You're beginning to remember my friend, aren't you?" asked Georg, giving him an encouraging nod. "Am I well covered up now?" asked his father, as if he couldn't see whether his feet were properly tucked in or not. "So you like it in bed, don't you?" said Georg, and tucked the blanket more closely around him. "Am I well covered up?" the father asked once more, seeming to be peculiarly intent upon the answer. "Don't worry, you're well covered up." "No!" cried his father, so that the answer collided with the question, and flinging the blanket back so violently that for a moment it hovered unfolded in the air, he stood upright in bed. With one hand he lightly touched the ceiling to steady himself. "You wanted to cover me up, I know, my little puppy, but I'm far from being covered up yet. And even if this is the last bit of strength I have, it's enough for you, more than enough. Of course I know your friend. He would have been a son after my own heart. That's why you've been betraying him all these years. Why else? Do you think I haven't wept for him? And that's why you've had to lock yourself up in the office. The boss is busy, mustn't be disturbed. Just so that you could write your lying little letters to Russia. But fortunately, a father doesn't need to be taught how to see through his own son. And now that you thought you'd pinned him down, so far down that you could plant your rear end on him so he couldn't move, then my fine son decides to up and get married. Georg looked up at the terrifying image of his father. His friend in St. Petersburg, whom his father suddenly knew so well, seized hold of his imagination as never before. He saw him lost in the vastness, again consistency. Of Russia, at the door of his empty, plundered warehouse, he saw him. Amid the wreckage of his storage shelves, the slashed remnants of his wares, the falling gas brackets, he barely stood upright. Why did he have to go so far away? "Pay attention to me," cried his father, and Georg, almost absent-mindedly, ran toward the bed to take everything in, but froze halfway there. "Because she lifted up her skirts," his father began to flute. "Because she lifted her skirts like this, the revolting creature. And mimicking her, he lifted his shirt so high that one could see the scar on his thigh from his war wound. Because she lifted her skirts like this, and this, and this, you went after her, and in order to have your way with her undisturbed, you have disgraced our mother's memory, betrayed your friend, and stuck your father into bed so that he can't move. But can he move, or can't he?" And he stood up quite unsupported and kicked his legs about. He shone with insight. Georg shrank into a corner, as far away from his father as possible. A long time ago, he had firmly made up his mind to watch everything with the greatest attention, so that he would not be surprised by any indirect attack, a pounce from behind or above. At this moment, he recalled this long-forgotten resolve, and then forgot it again, like someone drawing a short thread through the eye of a needle. "But your friend hasn't been betrayed after all," cried his father, emphasizing the point with stabs of his forefinger. "I've been representing him here on the spot. You comedian!" Georg could not resist shouting, realized at once the harm done, and, his eyes bulging in his head, bit his tongue, though too late, until the pain made his knees buckle. "Yes, of course I've been playing a comedy. A comedy, that's the perfect word for it. What other consolation was left for your poor old widowed father? Tell me, and while you're answering me, may you still be my loving son. What else was left to me in my back room, plagued by a disloyal staff, old to the very marrow of my bones? And my son strutting through the world, closing deals that I had prepared for him, turning somersaults in his glee, and striding away from his father with the composed face of a man of honor. Do you think I didn't love you, I, from whose loins you sprang? Now he's going to lean forward, thought George. If only he would topple over and smash to pieces. These words went hissing through his brain. His father leaned forward but did not topple. Since Georg didn't come any closer, as he had expected, he straightened himself up again. "Stay where you are, then. I don't need you. You think you have the strength to get yourself over here, and that you're only hanging back because you want to. Don't be too sure. I am still much the stronger. All by myself I might have had to give in, but your mother has given me her strength. I have established a fine connection with your friend, and I have your customers in my pocket." "He has pockets even in his undershirt," said Georg to himself, and thought that with this observation he could expose him for all the world to see. He was able to cling to that thought for no more than a moment, for in his distraction he kept on forgetting everything. "Just try linking arms with your bride and getting in my way. I'll sweep her from your side. You don't know how." Georg grimaced in disbelief. His father only nodded in the direction of Georg's corner, affirming the truth of his words. "How you amused me today, coming in here to ask if you should tell your friend about your engagement. He knows all about it already, you stupid boy. He knows it all. I've been writing to him, for you forgot to take my writing things from me. That's why he hasn't been here for years. He knows everything 100 times better than you do yourself. With his left hand, he crumples up your letters unopened, while with his right he holds mine and reads them through." In his exhilaration, he waved his arm over his head. "He knows everything 1,000 times better," he cried. 10,000 times, said Georg to make fun of his father, but in his very mouth the words turned deadly earnest. "For years I've been waiting for you to come with this question. Do you think I've concerned myself with anything else? Do you think I've been reading my newspapers? Look." And he threw Georg a page from a newspaper that had somehow found its way into the bed with him, an old newspaper with a name entirely unknown to Georg. "How long it's taken you to grow up. Your mother had to die. She couldn't live to see the happy day. Your friend is going to pieces in Russia. Even 3 years ago, he was yellow enough to be thrown away. And as for me, you can see what condition I'm in. You have eyes in your head for that." "So you've been lying in wait for me," cried George. His father said pityingly in an offhand manner, "I suppose you wanted to say that earlier, but now it is no longer appropriate." And in a louder voice, "So now you know there is more in the world than just you. Till now you've known only about yourself. An innocent child, yes, that you were, truly, but still more truly have you been a devilish human being. And therefore take note, I sentence you now to death by drowning." Georg felt himself driven from the room. The crash with which his father collapsed onto the bed behind him still rang in his ears as he fled. On the staircase, which he rushed down as if its steps were an inclined plane, he ran into the cleaning woman on her way up to do the morning tidying of the apartment. "Jesus!" she cried, and covered her face with her apron. But he was already gone. Out the front door he bolted across the roadway, driven toward the water. Already he was clutching at the railing as a starving man clutches for food. He swung himself over, like the accomplished gymnast he had been in his youth, to his parents' pride. With weakening grip, he was still holding on when he spied between the railings an approaching bus that would easily cover the sound of his fall. He called out in a faint voice, "Dear parents, I've always loved you," and let himself drop. At that moment, an almost endless line of traffic streamed over the bridge.